So, just throwing this out there, but who else has a couple little characters just waiting to whisper in their ear when they want to try something new, when they've made a little mistake, or who just pipes up suddenly when you're sitting in traffic overthinking that awkward or uncomfortable conversation a few days ago? Sometimes it just blurts out crap that always nags at you, and sometimes it whispers things that you didn't even know were lurking in the corner of your mind. That voice, that exhausting, relentless inner critic. The one that yells things like, "How could you be so stupid?" or "What the hell were you thinking?" But sometimes it just softly murmurs things like, "Why bother? You're probably just going to mess it up anyway," or "If you do this, you know they're all going to think whatever," but it's usually negative, the whatever. Sometimes it's more subtle though. Being a perfectionist, over-preparing, not speaking up in a meeting or a conversation. And that voice isn't just annoying. It's often hurtful, adding insult to injury with the emotional pain of those whispered, hurtful words. Well, what if I told you that just because that voice can be annoying or disruptive or hurtful doesn't necessarily mean it's the enemy? What if I told you it's a little more complicated than that? Today, I want to take a serious look into the messy and often uncomfortable but utterly fascinating world of living with our inner critic. At least I think it's fascinating, and I think you might too by the end of this episode. And we're not just going to yell at it to go away. I want to challenge the perception that it should always be silenced. We're going to get curious about what it's trying to do, and then we're going to explore when and how to take back the mic. So let's dig into that. Life doesn't give us a map for healing and growth. Yeah, it's messy, uncomfortable, and not for the faint of heart. I'm Joanna LaRue, and this is Transformative Journeys, a podcast about resilience, self-discovery, and learning how to rebuild something meaningful after everything changes. We talk neuroscience, real life, unlearning, and all the messy stuff in between. New episodes drop every other Monday, and there's bonus content on YouTube if you want more in the meantime. Welcome back to Transformative Journeys with Joanna. I'm your host, Joanna, and I hear voices. My inner critic can be loud, obnoxious, and often totally way out of line. Oh, and it also has the vocabulary of the offspring of two truck drivers, just so you get a full picture. But what I'm learning as I've been digging into other stuff for this podcast is that our inner critic isn't just a bully living rent-free in our heads. It might not always be right, but it's not always exactly wrong either. Because like so many other irritating and involuntary self-perceptions, it comes from the part of our brain that evolved to protect us. And holy crap, is that part of our brain hell-bent on what it sees as protecting us. From a neuroscience perspective, because you know I was going to go there, right? Our inner critic is closely tied to our good old amygdala, our brain's early warning threat detection system. And one of its primary roles is to constantly scan for danger, to anticipate risks, and all around try to keep you safe. It has pretty much not evolved much since the days when we were living in small tribes and hunting or being hunted by big, toothy, dangerous animals. But in modern life, that danger isn't a saber-toothed tiger waiting in the bushes or being kicked out of the cave to try and fend for ourselves. Threats for most of us in the Western world come in the form of social rejection, perceived failure, and anything that makes us uncomfortable emotionally. So when our inner critic jumps out and says, "Don't do that, they'll be upset with you," it's just your brain interpreting what you're doing and trying to keep you within the safety of your social system's expectations. The fact is that our brain doesn't know the difference between a threat to our ego and a threat to our life. It treats both like danger, and it whispers or yells the same kinds of warning messages either way. And those voices, they're shaped over time, and they have roots that run super deep. Childhood messaging, like internalizing what's criticized and what receives approval or praise. Cultural expectations, not just relating to, say, the ethnic or religious culture we grew up in, but also things like modern hustle culture and beauty standards. Things like deeply upsetting or traumatic events in our life. Previously perceived failures. And the shame we carry from events or experiences, whether they were within our control or not, that we've assumed as just part of who we are. So why can't we just be kinder to ourselves and let this stuff go? Because our brains have been rolling on this shit for years, and we've rehearsed it all so well that it's wired in there, and it just runs in the background on autopilot. So that sounds a bit doom and gloom, and well, I guess this is just the way I am, right? Well, that's really what I wanted to talk about today. Because our inner critic, it's not necessarily just sitting there waiting for an opportunity to ruin our life. It's actually trying in an, albeit unhelpful and backwards kind of way, to protect us. And psychologists like Dr. Kristin Neff, who's the author of the books Self-Compassion and Fierce Self-Compassion, and Dr. Rick Hanson, who authored a number of books, including Resilient, Hardwiring Happiness, and Just One Thing. They talk, among many other really cool things, about how our brains have what's called a negativity bias as a built-in feature. And what that means is that we tend to remember the bad stuff in our life more readily and more vividly than the good stuff. And doesn't that just suck? But we're that way for a good reason. We learned throughout our evolution and messages passed down to us that remembering danger helped to keep us alive. Unexpected movement or shadow in the bushes could be an animal getting ready to attack. Shiny leaves in a bunch of three, probably going to make me itchy if I touch them. Even mistaken ones, like our ancestors believing tomatoes were poisonous just because the leaves and plants are. And tomato plants are actually in the same family as evening nightshade, which can be deadly. So they made that assumption. Our inner critic has literally spent years scanning for anticipated judgment, and it thinks it's doing you this huge favor by making sure you don't do anything that would get you ostracized by your family and the social group that's important to you. The problem is, it's kind of like that overzealous great aunt who comes running in with the fire extinguisher every time the toaster smokes, or the coach who's always ready to yell at you if you mess up, but never pipes up to cheer you on when you're improving. It can be loud, it can be exhausting, and it can be flat out wrong. And there's a price we pay when we allow our inner critic to take the wheel all the time. When that inner voice is screaming at us all the time, our stress hormone cortisol spikes. Cortisol is a big player in our fight or flight response, and prolonged high levels of it can have a negative impact on our health and our mental well-being, which can lead to excessive fatigue and burnout, anxiety and feelings of low self-worth, sleep problems, even difficulty with memory, concentration, and making decisions, and physiological issues related to our metabolism, cardiovascular health, and our immune system. But today, I also want to play devil's advocate for just a minute. Because remember that I said it might not always be right, but it's not always exactly wrong either. I want to explore the theory that sometimes that inner critic can be like a nudge towards inner growth, towards reclaiming our own narrative and power, and towards resilience, if we're willing to listen to it with an open mind and a lot of self-compassion. And stay with me here because I'm going to put forward a flip of the script. Is our inner critic always just a malicious voice in our heads trying to sabotage our attempts to do something different, be someone different, than we've always done or been before? Or is it just doing a really, really bad job of translating the reality of the situation? Or, consider this, are we just not paying attention to the actual translation? When that voice says, don't do that, you're going to fail and embarrass yourself, maybe what it's really saying to us is, I'm scared you'll get hurt again like last time. I want to protect you from that. And when it says, you're not, fill in the blank, enough, what if it's actually trying to say, you've always relied on external approval in order to feel worthy inside. I'm going to keep you safe by protecting you from judgment. As well-meaning as it might be, I don't think we should just nod our heads amicably and let that voice and those messages control our decisions and actions. What I'm saying is that I think we need to learn to listen to them, but listen differently. Just telling our inner critic to shut up and go away, or positive self-talk, or fighting against it isn't really all that effective, to be honest. It's kind of like slapping a motivational sticker over a wound and calling it healed. That inner critic is often just a younger version of ourselves. It's uncertain, it's scared, and just like us now, it's trying to do the best it can with the information it has at the time, but still trying to help in the only way it knows how, by stopping us from moving towards what it perceives as danger. So I think we need to shift the conversation to trying to understand what's underneath that inner criticism. That, of course, definitely starts with self-compassion, and not just some fuzzy, feel-good, trendy buzzword self-compassion. Self-compassion is a skill set, a science-backed skill set that we can all learn. And what is it exactly? Well, to paraphrase Dr. Neff, compassion is defined as concern with the alleviation of suffering. And self-compassion is just compassion turned inward. And Dr. Neff's and Dr. Hansen's research has shown that Cultivating self-compassion literally changes your brain in not just good, but really great ways. It reduces activity in our amygdala, that overprotective guard dog, always on the alert for anything it perceives as new or threatening in our environment. And it also activates our prefrontal cortex, which is where decision-making and emotional regulation happen. So self-compassion isn't just woo-woo feel-good stuff. It rewires our brain, and it gives that guard dog a chew toy to occupy it for a little while. Some time to begin changing the conversation and taking back our power. Not by yelling at it to shut up, which often just, makes the dog bark louder. By patting it gently on the head to reassure it that we appreciate its vigilance, but we're okay right now. So when a thought like, I never get stuff right anyways, rears its ugly head, we can start asking, why do I think that? Is it really true? What are some of the things I have gotten right? Or when that voice whispers, I should have known better, we can start to explore, what did I learn from this? How can I use what I've just learned? So now that we've established that fighting our inner critic just doesn't work, yelling at it to shut up can just seed more self-doubt, and only hearing the surface message can add more shame to whatever caused the root of that message, what does it look like to quiet quit our inner critic's worst messages and dig under that surface layer with kindness and with self-compassion? We're heading there next, because I know you want to know. Have you checked out any of my free resources yet? I've developed these guides and toolkits to help you wherever you are on your journey, from resilience to mindfulness to grief support. I created these resources with you in mind because we may be on different paths at different times, but we are all on this journey together. You can grab them free at transformativejourneys.ca or just scroll down to the link in the show notes. All right, back to the episode. You've probably heard the term quiet quitting before. Usually it's related to workplaces, with its intent usually around mental well-being, work-life balance, and boundary setting. I think it can apply to other areas of our life too, because who doesn't need to work on self-care, setting boundaries, limiting stress, and establishing priorities, right? So today I want to apply the term internally, in terms of quietly quitting the job of being our own harshest critic. Because no matter what the worst your spinster great Aunt Mabel says about or to you about the way you live your life, you know you can do way worse than that to yourself. I'm not talking about the toxic positivity of be happy mantras and motivational stickers. I'm talking about those boundaries with ourselves, and about exploring the voices and thoughts with curiosity, but doing it with that self-compassion that we defined earlier. We aren't that inner critic's admin assistant. We're the boss. So let's redefine our role. So first of all, start asking what that inner voice is trying to protect us from. When it starts to whisper or yell, befriend that voice and listen to it without making it a personal judgment. Often when we pay attention, we'll discover that the message behind it isn't malice, it's just fear. Try to reframe that thought. Will you really never be good at whatever? How about approaching it from the angle, I'm still learning? Maybe not as quickly as I'd hoped, so what might help me improve? Developing a growth mindset is a powerful strategy for reducing shame when we're struggling with something that we're having difficulty with. Just like we can set external boundaries to protect ourselves from people, relationships, and emotional triggers, we can also set internal boundaries. And these can sometimes be the hardest to enforce because we often suck at obeying what we tell ourselves to do or not to do. But if your inner critic starts chirping while you're sitting in traffic or just as you lay your head on your pillow, how about you try telling it, stop, not now, we'll journal this out later, or maybe in the morning. That's not denying there's something you need to hash out with yourself. It's internal regulation. Because remember, you're the boss. This is, of course, one of my favorites because I'm a huge fan of mindfulness as a tool in so many areas of our lives. Be mindful of your thought patterns. You don't have to believe everything you think. You can try Dr. Tara Brach's RAIN, easy to remember technique for practicing mindfulness. And RAIN stands for recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. That's it. 4 steps to move from automatic self-criticism to grounded self-awareness. Recognize what's happening. Acknowledge the feeling or situation and name it. For example, this is anxiety or this is fear. Allow the experience to be there just as it is. You don't have to fix it right now. Just give it space to be present without judgment. Investigate with interest and with care, gently exploring that feeling. Where is it in your body? What thoughts or vulnerabilities does it bring up for you? And nurture with self-compassion and self-kindness. Treat yourself the way you would treat someone else you care about, offering the same kind of love and reassurance that you would offer someone else. And regular mindfulness practice actually changes the structure of our brains, increasing what they call gray matter in the areas of our brain responsible for emotional regulation. And finally, celebrate the small wins. We're not always going to do it right. Our inner critic is often going to try and sneak in the last word. But every single small act of positive reinforcement fuels neuroplasticity that rewires your brain towards better self-confidence. When you respond to that inner critic with self-compassion instead of anger or shame, you're actually building new neural pathways. All right, you know the drill. If you have a notebook or paper handy, here are a few reflection prompts that you can journal out or just take with you on your next walk. Make it kind and be self-compassionate. Think about a recent moment when your inner critic was loud. What was it saying? Was the message you were hearing really the message it was trying to send? What was it really afraid of? How would a compassionate friend have responded to you in that moment? Hang on to this one. You can read it later when your future self needs a little bit of extra self-love. All right, this week we talked about our inner critic and explored how, as annoying as it can be sometimes, maybe it's just a messenger. And it might be counterproductive to always shoot the messenger. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Your inner critic isn't necessarily the villain in the story you're creating about your life. Try thinking about it as just a poor, overworked, underskilled part of your brain that doesn't have great communication skills. Or maybe speaks a different language than the logical part of our brain. But the more we learn to respond to it with awareness, compassion, and boundaries, the quieter that critic is going to become, so that you can start reclaiming the mic. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Come say hi on Instagram at transformativejourneys.ca or visit my website and say hi to me there. Did you know that I do an enhanced version of this podcast on YouTube? I'm still not quite ready to go live on video for this yet, but I'll get there. It is one of my goals for this year. In the meantime, though, I'm creating this for you with on-screen prompts, beautiful visuals, and a more immersive experience. So head over to my YouTube channel, Transformative Journeys, to check that out. And if you've got an idea you'd like to hear me talk about, leave me a message and you might just see it in a future episode. And lastly, you know that hitting that subscribe button, tapping the bell, the like, whatever your platform has, helps my show get noticed. At least I hope you know that by now. So I'll make you a deal, you tap it, and I will keep dropping the best of what's in my heart and my sometimes slightly sarcastic soul so that we can keep learning together. Until next time, this is Joanna reminding you that it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is Transformative Journeys. See you next time. Your support helps me keep creating free tools and honest conversations. Because let's be real, even when you love what you're doing, sometimes it takes a whole lot of metaphorical duct tape to hold it all together. If you'd like to toss a little love into the duct tape fund, you can now support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Hey, just a disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and should not replace the advice of a medical or mental health expert. I'm not a licensed counselor or therapist, just a human with a mic and a story of growth and resilience. No degree, no fancy letters after my name. I'm a full-time student at the School of Hard Knocks, University of Life, where I figure I'll graduate when I take my last breath. In other words, I'm just Joanna, a fellow human being on my journey through this thing called life, and your guide on this transformative journey.